Have you ever felt deeply connected to someone, but somehow more confused than happy the longer you stayed? Welcome back to Decode His Mind, where we break down the hidden psychology behind love, attraction, and emotional confusion, so you can finally understand what's really happening beneath the surface of your connections. Have you ever crossed paths with someone who made you feel deeply connected, yet somehow left you feeling uncertain at the same time? Someone who looked at you like you truly mattered, but then vanished as if you didn't. Stay with this until the end, because what you're about to understand can completely shift how you see this kind of connection. Not just emotionally, but mentally too. You won't only feel lighter, you'll finally start to understand what has really been happening inside you and inside them. Because this isn't just confusion, it goes deeper than that. It usually begins in a way that feels almost perfect. Everything seems natural. Nothing feels forced. Their quotes, this pull you can't really explain. Conversations feel easy. Emotions feel strong. And for the first time in a while, you feel genuinely seen. It's intense, almost like something meaningful is forming right in front of you. And then slowly, something changes. It's not a sudden ending. It's not clear or direct. It's subtle. They start becoming a little distant. Replies take longer. Their energy feels different. The warmth you once felt starts fading into space between you. And suddenly, you're left questioning everything. You start replaying conversations in your head, thinking about your words, their tone, your reactions, searching for a reason, a mistake, something that explains the shift. But nothing makes sense, because nothing actually ended. There was no closure, no clear rejection, just distance, just silence. And that's what makes it so confusing. Because when something ends clearly, your mind can accept it, it can process it, it can eventually let go. But when there's no ending, your mind keeps holding on, trying to complete the story. And that's where the emotional spiral begins. You start asking yourself questions that slowly drain your peace. Did they ever care? Was any of it real? Why does it feel so strong if they're acting like this? Without noticing it, your self-worth starts becoming tied to their behavior. When they're close, you feel valued. When they pull away, you feel like you've lost something in yourself. This isn't a sign that you're weak. This is how the human mind naturally reacts, because unpredictability creates attachment. When someone gives you attention and then withdraws it, your brain starts craving that attention even more. It doesn't just focus on the person, it starts chasing the feeling they created. And the more inconsistent they are, the stronger the attachment becomes. That's why letting go feels so difficult. Not because the person is perfect, but because the pattern is unpredictable. But there's another side to this that most people don't realize. Some individuals experience emotional closeness very differently. For them, intimacy can feel overwhelming, not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much and don't know how to handle it. So when the connection becomes deeper, something inside them shifts. Not always consciously, but emotionally. They start feeling exposed, uncertain, even afraid of dependence, afraid of losing control, afraid of vulnerability. And instead of moving closer, they pull away. Not because you weren't enough, but because the intensity of the connection feels hard for them to stay in. This creates a painful mismatch, because while you associate love with closeness, they associate emotional intensity with distance. So you move toward them and they move away from you. And that's how the cycle starts. You try harder, they step back more. You give more energy, they withdraw further. Slowly, you begin losing focus on yourself and start focusing entirely on their behavior. Every message becomes important. Every small sign feels meaningful. Every shift in tone feels like a signal you need to decode. Deep inside, you know something feels off, but you hold on anyway, because despite everything, the connection still feels real. And that's what traps you. You're not actually chasing them. You're chasing the version of them you experienced in the beginning, the version that made you feel understood, wanted, and emotionally safe. Your mind keeps telling you that if it felt that real once, it must be possible again. But the truth is, not every intense connection is meant to bring peace. Some connections enter your life to reveal patterns inside you. They challenge your emotional boundaries. They show you how much you're willing to tolerate just to feel chosen. And that realization can be uncomfortable, but it's also powerful. Because once you start seeing the pattern clearly, something inside you begins to change. You stop blaming yourself for their distance. You stop chasing clarity from someone who can't give it. You stop shrinking yourself just to maintain their presence. But even then, in the middle of it all, the confusion doesn't disappear instantly, because there's another layer to this cycle. You decide to move on. You try to focus on your life. You create distance. You tell yourself this time you're done. And for a while, you start feeling stronger. But then, unexpectedly, they return in some form. A message, a reaction, a small reminder. And suddenly, everything shifts again. It feels like you're pulled back into something you thought you had escaped. Not by choice, but by pattern. Like something unseen keeps reconnecting the thread between you. This happens because the mind doesn't treat unfinished emotional experiences as complete. When something ends without clarity, it stays open internally. Like an unfinished story, your brain keeps trying to resolve. So even in silence, the connection stays active. Then add inconsistency again. Attention followed by distance, presence followed by absence, and the emotional response becomes even stronger. The brain starts associating that person with reward, but in an unpredictable way. And unpredictability strengthens emotional bonding. You're not just thinking about them, you're anticipating the next emotional shift. And that's why stepping away feels so difficult. But this isn't only happening on your side. They feel the shift too. Even if they don't show it clearly, even if they act unaffected, distance creates awareness in them. When your reactions change, when your energy is no longer the same, something inside them notices. And that creates discomfort, uncertainty, even curiosity. So they return. Not always with clarity, not always with intention, but enough to reconnect the emotional loop. And just like that, the cycle restarts. Hope returns. Emotion returns. Confusion returns. And again, you find yourself questioning why something so intense cannot become stable. At this point, many people turn the blame inward. They think they're too emotional, too attached, too much. But that isn't the truth. The real issue is not intensity, it's inconsistency. Because consistency creates emotional safety. Without it, your mind stays alert, always analyzing, always waiting, always hoping for stability that never fully arrives. Over time, this drains you mentally and emotionally, even when nothing is actively happening. And yet, despite all of this, the connection doesn't completely disappear. It lingers in thoughts, memories, and emotional flashes that return without warning. That's why it feels so hard to let go, because even logic and emotion don't move at the same pace. Still, something important begins to happen within you. Awareness starts building. You start noticing the cycle instead of just feeling it. You start questioning the pattern instead of just reacting to it. And that awareness is where real change begins. Because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. And slowly you stop reacting automatically. You start returning to yourself. A moment comes where something inside you quietly shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. You start to pause instead of react. And in that pause, a different question finally appears in your mind. Not why are they like this, but why am I allowing this to continue? And that question changes everything. Because now the focus is no longer on trying to understand them. It turns towards something far more important: understanding yourself. And this is where the real transformation begins. Not in the connection, but in you. This is the stage where people either lose themselves completely or finally start becoming who they were meant to be. When you ask that question honestly, your direction changes. You stop analyzing their behavior and start observing your own. At first, it doesn't feel empowering. It feels uncomfortable because you begin to notice things you ignored for a long time. How much effort you were giving, how often you were adjusting your emotions, how many times you stayed quiet just to keep them close. And slowly, a truth starts to surface that is hard to ignore. You weren't just part of the connection. You were carrying it. You were holding something that was never balanced to begin with. And that realization doesn't feel light. It feels heavy because it removes the illusion that things were equal. It removes the hope that if you just tried a little harder, everything would suddenly work. Now you see it clearly, and clarity often hurts before it heals. This is the point where many people feel a kind of internal collapse, not because of what the other person did, but because of what they finally understand about themselves. You start to notice your own exhaustion, not from loving, but from overgiving, not from caring, but from caring alone. And in that exhaustion, something begins to shift. You stop reacting instantly. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop rushing to fix distance that you didn't create. Not out of anger, but out of awareness. Because now you can see the pattern. Every time you gave more, things didn't become stable. They became more unbalanced. And for the first time, you begin to pull your energy back. It isn't easy, because part of you still hopes things will change, still hopes they will suddenly understand, still hopes effort will eventually be matched. But another part of you, quieter, stronger, is starting to choose differently. You begin choosing peace over intensity, clarity over confusion, yourself over uncertainty. And that choice feels unfamiliar because you're no longer acting from habit. You're acting from self-respect. When that shift happens, the dynamic naturally changes, not because you are forcing distance, but because your energy is no longer fully available the way it used to be. The attention you once gave without thinking becomes intentional. The emotional access they had is no longer automatic, and that creates a reaction. Not always immediate, not always obvious, but real. Because when someone becomes used to your consistent presence and suddenly feels a change, they notice it. They feel the space where your energy used to be. And that space creates awareness. Now the control shifts. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer trying to prove your value. And that is unfamiliar to them because they were used to a version of you that always stayed emotionally available. Now you don't. And this shift brings something deeper into motion on both sides. It creates reflection. It creates discomfort. It creates awareness of what was taken for granted. But this is also where many people lose themselves again, because the moment they sense change, they rush back. They reopen access too quickly. They fall into old patterns and the cycle begins again. But if you stay grounded in what you've now seen, something very different begins to grow inside you. You become more stable, less reactive, less emotionally dependent on their behavior. You stop measuring your worth through their attention. You stop waiting for small signs to feel okay. And slowly, your entire emotional world starts to settle. You begin to realize you don't need intensity to feel alive. You need consistency to feel safe. And that changes how you see everything. Now you're no longer impressed by temporary attention. You're no longer satisfied with inconsistency. You're no longer willing to lose yourself for something uncertain. This is real growth. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply internal. And once that shift happens, even if they return, even if they reach out, even if they try again, you are not the same person anymore. You don't respond from the same emotional place. You don't feel the same urgency. You don't ignore what you now understand. You see clearly, and clarity gives you something powerful. Not control over them, but control over yourself. At this stage, the connection is no longer something that pulls you unconsciously. It becomes something you observe with awareness. You're no longer inside the confusion. You're seeing it from outside. And from here, everything simplifies. There is no more overthinking, no more decoding mixed signals, no more emotional guessing. Reality becomes easier to read than your thoughts. And one of two things always begins to happen. Either they rise toward clarity and consistency, or they fade out of your life. Not because you demanded it, but because you stopped participating in imbalance. If there is something real beneath the confusion, your shift forces change, not through pressure, but through absence of old patterns. They can no longer approach you casually. They can no longer offer inconsistency and still keep access to your energy. Now there is a mirror they can't avoid. And in that mirror, they have to face a choice. Step forward with clarity or remain in distance and lose connection. In the end, this entire experience was never just about another person or a confusing connection. It was about what it revealed within you. It showed you how easily emotional intensity can be mistaken for love, how inconsistency can create attachment, and how quickly you can lose yourself when you start prioritizing someone else's behavior over your own peace. But the real shift happens when you stop asking why they act a certain way and start asking why you are staying in something that drains you. That moment brings awareness, and awareness brings change. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you can't unsee it anymore. You begin to choose yourself differently. You stop chasing uncertainty. You stop accepting imbalance, and you start valuing consistency, clarity, and emotional safety over temporary intensity. And whether they stay or leave no longer defines your worth. What defines you is that you finally stopped abandoning yourself to keep someone else close. If this message helped you see things more clearly, make sure you like this video, subscribe to *** Decode His Mind, ***, and hit the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. And in the comments drop the word clarity if this hit home for you and you're choosing yourself from today forward.